Welcome to this explainer. Today we're tackling something absolutely crucial. It's the ultimate build versus buy dilemma for the ride-hailing space. Whether you're a startup founder, a traditional fleet operator going digital, or making moves at a mobility company, this one choice, your technology foundation, literally defines your operational ceiling. It sets your long-term costs, your control, and your ability to scale. So, do you build a custom taxi app completely from scratch, or do you buy a pre-built white label solution? Let's break it down. Here's a quick look at our agenda. First, the build versus buy decision. Then, the reality of white label, followed by the custom development case. We'll look at the true cost over 3 years, explore the staged growth strategy, and wrap up with final checks before you sign. All right, let's jump in. Section 1, the build versus buy decision. Okay, let's dive into this core tension. It's that classic tightrope walk between launching incredibly fast and building a robust, scalable foundation for your future. First things first, let's establish exactly what a white label taxi app is. Basically, it's a pre-built software solution where the vendor has already done the heavy lifting. They've developed, tested, and deployed it. Usually, you get 3 main components out of the box: a passenger app for iOS and Android, a driver app with navigation and earnings dashboards, and a web-based admin panel to manage everything. You just apply your business branding, configure your settings, and boom, you're basically ready to go live. And to ground this in market reality, get this. 65% of ride-hailing startups actually choose a white label solution for their initial launch. 65%. It is the dominant entry strategy for sure, and for very valid reasons that we'll explore. But you really need to understand the structural compromise you're making when you join that majority. The absolute easiest way to think about the difference between these two paths is a real estate analogy. Going with a white label solution is a lot like renting a fully furnished apartment. It's ready to use right now. You can customize the decor, change the logo, set basic fares, but ultimately you don't own the property. You can't knock down a wall, and you're subject to the landlord's rules. Custom development, on the other hand, is like building a house from the ground up. Yes, it takes a lot of time and a huge chunk of upfront capital before you can move in, but when it's done, you own it completely. You make every architectural decision, and that intellectual property is yours. Because of that structural reality, this is the single most critical question you must ask a white label vendor. It's not, what features do you have right now? It's, what happens when I need something the app doesn't have? If their answer is that you have to pay for a massively expensive custom feature quote, you are entering a vendor-controlled relationship. You need to ask this question on day 1, definitely not after the contract is already signed. Section 2, the reality of white label. Let's look past the marketing brochures to see what works brilliantly and where the hidden traps are. We'll start with the genuine advantages, because honestly, they're substantial. If speed to market is your priority, white label absolutely wins. You can literally go from signing a contract to live rides in 2 to 8 weeks. Compare that to 3 to 12 months for a custom build. In a market driven by network effects, being live months earlier is a real game changer. Plus, the upfront investment is significantly lower, you're deploying proven infrastructure, and you don't even need an in-house tech team. And your ongoing monthly costs? Highly predictable. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what happens when we peel back the surface. There are hidden structural limitations. First, customization usually stops right at branding, so truly unique pricing models are off the table. Crucially, you do not own your raw trip data, which locks your most valuable asset in the vendor's infrastructure. If they go down, your business stops. Plus, you might hit hidden architectural ceilings during big growth surges, and you'll quickly find that asking for custom features becomes incredibly expensive and notoriously slow. Section 3, the custom development case. With those limits in mind, when does building a bespoke platform become an absolute business necessity? Custom development grants you total control. You dictate your business logic, the exact pricing rules, the whole flow. You achieve true data ownership and portability, meaning that trip data is yours to use for business intelligence. The architecture scales exactly how you need it to, and most importantly, you can seamlessly integrate third-party APIs. Think about linking up with healthcare systems for non-emergency medical transport or corporate HR software. That gives you genuine, replicable, competitive differentiation in the market. Section 4, true cost over 3 years. We really need to reframe the financial perspective here and zoom out from that day 1 sticker shock to the total cost of ownership. Let's look at this comparison table spanning 36 months for a mid-sized operation. Yes, the initial setup for white label is drastically lower, say 5 to 15 grand versus 80 to 200,000 for custom. But look closely at those ongoing costs. High-tier SaaS fees for white label can easily exceed $40,000 over 3 years. And if your vendor takes a revenue share, like 1 to 5% of gross bookings, that compounds enormously as you grow. Factor in the crazy cost of custom feature add-ons from a vendor versus paying your own developers, and you can see how the financial gap narrows significantly over time.
So the takeaway here is this. There is a mathematical intersection. While white label is fantastic for preserving early cash flow, the inflection point where custom actually becomes cheaper per ride usually arrives somewhere between year 3 and year 5 of a growing platform. And the more successful you are, the faster you're going to hit that exact point. Section 5, the staged growth strategy. Thankfully, you don't actually have to make a permanent, mutually exclusive choice on day one. There's a smart hybrid approach. And this brilliantly illustrates that risk-adjusted path, rent to test and build to scale. In phase 1, covering roughly your first 18 months, you launch using a white label platform. Your goal is simply to validate market demand, build your driver supply, and strictly document every single limitation you bump into. Then, phase 2, you evaluate transition triggers based on your growth. Finally, phase 3, you migrate to a custom build, using all those documented limitations from phase 1 as your exact development brief, already knowing the market demand is real. So what is the primary trigger to make that transition? It's volume. Specifically hitting roughly 20,000 monthly rides. At this volume, the math just flips. The per-ride cost of custom development starts becoming highly competitive against those escalating SaaS fees and revenue shares extracted by vendors. It is the mathematical signal that your business has literally outgrown its rented foundation. But ride volume isn't the only signal. There are other critical triggers that scream, stop renting. Watch out if a vital custom feature quote suddenly hits $25,000 or more, or if VC investors start flagging your lack of IP ownership. Maybe revenue share has become your absolute largest operational cost, or an enterprise client demands deep integration into their internal systems. These are all definitive indicators that it is time to build your own asset. Section 6, Final Checks Before You Sign. Let's move to our final actionable framework to equip you for those vendor negotiations. You absolutely need to interrogate the vendor and get their answers in writing before you sign anything. First, can you export your complete raw trip and rider data anytime? If you ever plan to transition, that is non-negotiable. Second, are you licensing a compiled binary, or is there an option to own the source code? Ask about their exact uptime service level agreement. Demand transparency on the typical cost and timeline for custom features, and find out if their APIs are truly open for third-party integrations. Continuing that interrogation, ask if their platform supports running multiple service brands from one admin panel. Nail down exactly how their pricing scales as your volume grows so you avoid massive overage charges. Ensure their data hosting strictly complies with local privacy regulations. Force them to explain their exact migration process and termination fees if you choose to leave. And lastly, ask to speak directly to 3 current operators roughly your size. Remember, a vendor who avoids these questions is telling you exactly what kind of partner they are going to be. I want to leave you with this final provocative question. As you evaluate your software options, ask yourself, are you building a long-term technology asset, or are you just testing the market today? If you're testing, white label is your fastest path to a definitive answer. But if your goal is deep differentiation, specific enterprise integrations, or venture scale, every day you spend renting software is a day you aren't building the intellectual property that will ultimately define your business's valuation. Choose the technology foundation that aligns with your final destination. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this framework helps you make a confident, strategic decision.